I'm Jimmy Neutron. Welcome to my lab.
This is amazing. He's a giant block of cheese.
Nowadays, crossovers are nothing new. Some are good and some are very bad. But when I was growing up, there were no big pop culture crossovers. There was no MCU. We did have Scooby-Doo meets Batman, no doubt. But was that something to brag about? However, one cool crossover that everyone remembers from the 2000s was on Nickelodeon. Take two of the most iconic cartoons on the network, both with a similar art style and produced by the same guys and company. And don't ever have them do a crossover, that'd be stupid. Instead, do a crossover with one of those and then a cartoon from when 3D animation was very early on. And make the 2D character look absolutely horrifying in 3D. Try to make him look like he belongs on a 3D remake of Angry Beavers instead of Jimmy Neutron. But as a kid, I didn't care. I just thought it was cool to see them hang out. This was my first introduction to what a crossover even was. Now, my wife proofread this up to this point and disagreed with my assessment about there being no crossovers. She was wondering if I was going to talk about the That's So Sweet Life of Hannah Montana. No. I was a Nickelodeon kid. SpongeBob, Fairly Odd Parents, Jimmy Neutron, Danny Phantom, Invader Zim, Chalk Zone. Does anyone remember Chalk Zone? That show had one of the most creative premises of all time. These were my childhood shows. Even later, I greatly enjoyed what was on the network with Back at the Barnyard and the Penguins of Madagascar. Shortly after those, I stopped watching TV altogether after I fell in love. With the Wii, that is. I wouldn't meet my wife for a few more years. So I can't speak as to what I missed, but I hear it wasn't great. But being a Nick kid in the early 2000s with a PS2, you can bet I played all the Nickelodeon video games I could get my hands on. One of the main games I played was Nicktoons Unite, developed by Blue Tongue Entertainment of the Blob fame, and published by THQ of every licensed game of the 2000s fame. This was a crossover game starring Jimmy and Timmy again, but now joined by Danny Phantom and cartoon sensation SpongeBob SquarePants. See, this was a SpongeBob game, which per the laws of nature meant that I wanted it. Now, what do I remember about this game from my childhood? I remember it not being great. I remember strange music, slightly boring gameplay, and a really fun story. So what is the story of this game? Well, it begins with the most popular of the Nicktoons, SpongeBob, waking up to a new morning, and well, I'll just show you because this opening is actually pretty funny.
Good morning, Gary. What are we gonna do today? Meow. Great idea. Let's visit Patrick.
Citizens of Bikini Bottom, may I have your attention, please?
I wonder what's going on. Meow.
From now on, I, Plankton, and the Syndicate will rule Bikini Bottom. But I'm fair. I listen to the little people. Those of you who don't want me to rule, raise your hand. Get them!
After that, Jimmy's dog Goddard is sent to recruit SpongeBob, who jumps through a portal to meet up with Jimmy, Timmy, and Danny in Jimmy's lab. Jimmy explains that the crisis began after Jimmy created a portal allowing him to visit other worlds. Professor Calamitous, one of the villains from the Jimmy Neutron show, had somehow made a copy of this portal and used it to create a syndicate of villains from all the other worlds. Plankton from SpongeBob, Crocker from the Fairly Odd Parents, and Vlad Plasmius from Danny Phantom. They were all working together to take over the world and build a device capable of destroying worlds. Because of this, our team of 4 heroes charges through the Ghost Zone in Amity Park to fight Vlad, Bikini Bottom to fight Plankton, Dimsdale and Fairy World to battle Crocker, and then inside Jimmy's dog because the Retroville levels were cut likely due to time constraints. Then you have a final battle and the credits roll. It's a basic story, but I actually think there's some fun moments in it. Some of the writing is actually pretty funny. However, with the exception of Danny's world, which I think nails the tone pretty well, the rest of the worlds don't really feel like you're visiting the areas from the actual shows. Bikini Bottom especially is just so drab and dull. Dimsdale has been completely transformed into an ancient temple-like environment after Crocker took over. This doesn't even feel like the Fairly Odd Parents at all. I don't know why they went in this direction. Fairy World, however, feels a little more accurate, and hearing from Jordan Von Strangle is always a plus.
Wow!
At last, some help!
Like I said earlier, Jimmy's World Retroville was cut entirely. For me, that's the first big shortcoming this game has. For 3 out of the 4 level themes, it doesn't even feel like you're playing through the cartoons. The vibes are just off. Not helping this is the very strange choice in music. Some of these songs aren't bad, and in other contexts maybe they would even be good, but they absolutely do not fit here. When I think of these cartoons, I do not think of quiet, jazzy music with an extra emphasis on the saxophone. It just doesn't fit. Also, what is up with this menu music? You'd expect something bold and intense for when these 4 icons meet up, but instead you get this. Until you go to the level select and hold down, then you get this. One thing that does work, however, are the characters themselves. All the important voice actors from the TV shows reprise their roles here, which is great. Everyone does an awesome job and really sells the characters even if the worlds feel off. Also, the main four play off each other surprisingly well. Jimmy has a natural fit as the smart leader of the team, while SpongeBob fills in the optimistic, naive newcomer role. Timmy is impulsive and is always excited to charge in the battle, and Danny is more of a seasoned and serious hero. The four personalities play off each other perfectly in the dialogue and cutscenes, and you can actually believe that they would function really well together as an actual team. I think because of this, the main takeaway people have from this game is that it should have been a TV show special instead of a video game, but I disagree. I think a game was actually a better fit for this crossover because games are naturally longer than a TV special or even a feature-length movie. The game is about 5 hours, and thus gives the characters a lot of space to interact with each other. The only thing I could think of that would have been better than a video game for this sort of thing would be an actual TV series on its own, not just an episode. And to be honest, it's kind of a shame that they never did that, but this game does have many sequels that we'll look at in the future, don't worry. So that's the story and the feel of the game, but what about the actual game side of this game? Well, it's not very good at all, unfortunately. Let's start with the good first. I kind of like the gameplay setup. Having all four characters on the screen at all times is actually a really cool mechanic. And the characters you're not controlling will actually go out and fight the enemies with you. You know how in other games the CPU Player 2 character will attack other enemies but they won't be allowed to do actual damage to them? Basically, they mainly just work to stall the enemy until you're done fighting yours? Well, that is not the case here. Your allies can and will defeat enemies while you're fighting. It makes you really appreciate having them there, and again, it adds to the feeling that this is an actual team. It's the perfect mechanic for this type of game. To balance this mechanic, your CPU-controlled teammates will also take damage during the fights. When you grab a health power-up, it will heal the whole team while giving an extra bump to the person who picked it up. This encourages you to swap characters around to grab health power-ups and requires a bit of strategy as to how you're managing your team. If one team member is low on health, you quick rush over there to help them. If a teammate dies, they use up a life, and if you run out of lives, you have to restart the stage. But we never ran out of lives. We almost did at one point as Jimmy kept standing in front of an electrical pole, and it cost us about 6 lives in a row, but Danny quickly saved both him and our progress. Jimmy was actually giving us a lot of problems throughout the entire playthrough. Jimmy? I think he even crashed the game at one point by getting glitched on another character during a cutscene.
Patrick, watch out for that jellyfish harvester! Patrick, no! Wow!
Help! Kind of. It tickles. Sponge, help! SpongeBob! Help! You! Ouch! Sponge! You! Ouch! Sponge! You! Ouch! Just SpongeBob! Ooh.
Don't worry, SpongeBob. We'll get him back. Let's stick to Sandy's plan. We'll take out these jellyfish harvesters and then enter Plankton's fortress. We'll find Patrick there.
This game has a lot of funny moments like that because the characters are programmed to space apart from the others. So if you move in some specific ways, some characters can start doing funny things like running in place or getting intimidated and backing away. It's actually pretty funny to watch. Another thing that's great here is the idea of special power-ups for every character. Everyone can unlock 3 unique abilities that only they can use. You can then upgrade these abilities along with your regular attack using the coins that you collected throughout the game. This is another great feature as it actually gives you a reason to want to collect these things. But notice that I said the idea of special power-ups is great. The actual execution of this idea is hit or miss depending on the character. Some of these abilities are purely situational where you only use them to really solve puzzles. SpongeBob can absorb water to squirt it at things and to solve said puzzles. It requires having a pool of water nearby and is only ever used to solve the most basic of these puzzles, and it is useless in combat. He can also throw a Doodle Bob clone to distract enemies, which though has its uses in battle is still 99% of the time used for puzzles. His last power-up, the Bubble Bomb, is basically the same deal, though it does make for an interesting boss fight against Plankton. Jimmy has a Shrink Ray, Flare Gun, and Football Helmet, which though can be used as attacks, are basically just also used for doing things like activating switches. Timmy can freeze objects and use his superhero persona to activate a giant metal pan from his chin. These are again used mainly to solve puzzles, though they can also still be used in battle. However, his last power-up is very interesting. It's a healing move, and this is a great mechanic. The characters have to be close to him for him to heal them, so pulling it off during battle is actually pretty tricky yet rewarding. However, you're given this at like the end of the game and only have 2 levels to really use it in. I think this is another consequence of the Retroville levels being cut. Lastly, there's Danny, and his power-ups are actually incredibly interesting mechanics. He can overshadow stunned enemies, allowing you to control them in battle, and it makes for another useful puzzle mechanic. Then there's the coolest ability in the game, Danny's ability to go intangible. This power is incredibly useful in battle. All characters have the ability to shield attacks, but it requires them to stand perfectly still. In his intangible form, Danny can still keep moving while being completely invincible to damage. It also allows him to phase through specific walls, and if he picks up some objects while being intangible, those objects will become intangible too. This is a great power-up mechanic as it's extremely useful in battle and has potential for really interesting puzzles. I feel like you could create a really interesting game just with Danny's moveset alone in this game. Lastly, you have his Ghostly Whale Attack from the Ultimate Enemy TV special. A fully upgraded Ghostly Whale Attack destroys enemies and feels amazing to use, though it doesn't sound amazing to use. So the character mechanics are surprisingly creative with a lot of potential, especially for a kid's game. So where does this game go wrong? This game has possibly the most bland and uninteresting level design I've ever seen. You basically go to a room, fight a bunch of enemies, go down a hallway, solve a mindless puzzle. The door is blue, switch to Timmy, freeze it, walk through door, bam, puzzle. This is not puzzle design, this is a flowchart. After you solve the mindless puzzle, you then encounter more enemies to repeat the cycle. Wash, rinse, and repeat for 5 hours, and that's it. There's not much more I can add to that because it's literally all you do the entire game. It's drab, dull, and repetitive. It's so bland and uninteresting that I can't even think of anything more that I wish to discuss about it. Battle, hallway, flowchart, repeat for 5 hours, credits. There's also only a handful of unique enemies in the whole game, so the battling gets stale very quickly. However, I will say that the boss fights are a lot of fun. Despite that, I can't recommend anyone play this game unless they're nostalgic for it or really love these characters. If you want to experience the best this game has to offer, you're probably just best off watching the cutscenes on YouTube. I made Mrs. Hydrated Gaming play co-op with me, and here is her one-sentence review.
Nicktoons Unite makes 5 hours feel like 5 days.
And this is a huge shame, as there are glimpses of a great game here. Earlier I said that the character mechanics were great, and they actually do have the possibility for making for fun puzzles. Here's an example of an interesting puzzle that actually was in the game. There's a lever behind a damaged piece of wall on the other side of a bottomless pit. Danny can fly across the pit, but he can't blow open the wall. You realize you need to make SpongeBob make a bubble bomb and then quickly throw it over the pit to Danny to then throw out the door before it explodes, and then you can go pull the lever, creating a bridge that everyone else can walk over. It's not the most complex puzzle in the world, but this is a kid's game, remember? It's the perfect level of complexity for a game like this, and it illustrates the concept of using the character abilities to actually make for interesting puzzles. But this is probably the only instance of this happening in the game. If they added more sections like this, I think this game goes from boring to great really fast. And heck, if they fix the aesthetic and the music of these worlds to feel more true to the shows, you could have an amazing game on your hands. This game is one of those heartbreaking cases where it actually has great mechanics with a lot of potential, but then doesn't do anything with them. It's a bad game because of it, plain and simple, but it's a game I love anyways because I grew up with it and these characters. However, I don't recommend it to anyone who doesn't have the same background with it as I do. And with that said, I want to thank you for watching Hydrated Gaming. Stay hydrated and have a nice rest of your day.
Go!